G'day everyone, this is Senator Ralph Babette from the United Australia Party. A word of warning, what you are about to watch next is highly distressing. It is footage from a public hearing which we held in the Senate quite recently. This public hearing was in regards to the Born Alive bill. The Born Alive bill, what's that about? Did you know that at the moment in Australia, there are children being born alive as a result of a failed abortion and left to die? A stain on the collective soul of our nation. So myself, Senator Matt Canavan, and Senator Alex Antic are going to do something about it. We're going to do something about it, which is why we've introduced this bill called the Born Alive Bill. Now, this bill, what does it seek to do? It seeks to give a child born alive, I keep stressing this, born alive as a result of a failed abortion, the same amount of care as any other child. Now, the fact that this is going on in our nation is not right. It's wrong. If after watching this video you are distressed, please call the phone number at the bottom of your screen. It is a phone number for Lifeline.
I'd like to begin by sharing a story from our submission from a midwife that I personally know. She has granted us permission to share using the pseudonym Mary in the hope that no midwife ever has to go through what she did. Mary was an experienced midwife of 13 years. One day, she answered a call bell in the postnatal unit of her hospital in Australia. A pregnancy had been terminated, and Mary's colleague asked her to take the baby's body and photograph it, which is common practice.
The indisputable fact that hundreds of Australian babies survive abortion, are born alive but left to die, often in harrowing circumstances, is without a doubt one of the most significant human rights issues of our day.
Mary says, and I quote, "When I began photographing the baby, the flash stimulated this little boy to breathe. I was horrified. We didn't know what to do."
The goal of this bill is very simple. This bill will ensure that an Australian child who has been born alive as a result of a failed abortion procedure will in the future be entitled to the same level of medical care and treatment as any other newborn child.
There was no policy for this situation. I picked up this perfectly formed baby, wrapped him in a blanket and put him under a heater in the storeroom. It was so distressing.
Looking at the data as I have combed through from the Victorian and Queensland health reports, we can see that 724 babies have been born alive and left to die without any legal rights to mandatory care following a failed abortion.
I feel under enormous pressure to keep working, so at every opportunity I would check in on him until he died some hours later.
Because this is a human rights issue, and Australia is signature to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, that was done at a federal level. And so, as I would understand it, we have a federal responsibility to see that actually enacted for every child that is born.
Adding to the trauma of this experience, being asked by the doctor to lie.
Refusing to provide medical care to a child who is born alive amounts to allowing a person to be killed, warranting the charge of homicide. Homicide, as defined by the Australian Institute of Criminology, is the unlawful killing of a person.
The Northern Territory Coroner's report into the death of baby Jessica Jane provides some insight into what occurs. Following being aborted, Jessica Jane was born alive and placed on a metal kidney dish in an empty room for approximately 80 minutes until she died.
The argument presented today can be summarised in syllogistic form. Premise 1. All children born alive are legally recognised as persons and are afforded the rights and protections associated with personhood.
According to Nurse Williams, who delivered her, Jessica Jane, although premature, was apparently healthy, had no apparent abnormalities, and her vital signs were relatively good. She weighed 515 grams. When the doctor who authorised the abortion was informed of the live birth and the baby's AGPAS scores were strong, his only response was to say, "So?"
Premise 2. The child following a failed termination is born alive. Premise 3. If a person unjustifiably and or negligently killed, then it constitutes homicide.
The nurse checked on her every 10 to 15 minutes and observed crying and movement, but the baby was left to die where she lay. The coroner stated that after an hour, her heartbeat and breathing slowed until death.
You can understand that in a circumstance such as Jessica Jane that Michelle outlined to us so tragically, the nurse kept on checking on her every 10 or 15 minutes. The baby was crying, so the distress for Nurse Williams was great.
These babies are alive. We have had calls to our office. One in particular, I took from very distressed midwife who knows the babies are alive and have told the stories. This midwife was shell-shocked when a baby was born and alive and left to die in a Melbourne hospital in 2013.
Now, I'm sure there would be some hospitals that would provide the opportunity for a nurse in that situation to somehow alleviate her own sense of culpability for this baby dying, but there is no legislation. It's one of the reasons why we desperately need this legislation.
This is a situation where the healthcare professionals and the parent are a bit conflicted. You know, this is a termination of pregnancy. The intention is to deliver a dead baby, not a live one. And so there's always an element of shock and surprise when a live baby arrives, and people aren't always prepared to deal with that. You know, to switch from one mindset to another mindset. And I think that it's very important that women undergoing these procedures are aware that it is a real risk.
Regardless of what you may hear from those who oppose this bill, in no way does this proposal create more barriers to abortion laws. Again, all we are simply asking is to ensure that a baby born alive as a result of a failed abortion procedure is entitled to the same level of medical care and treatment as any other newborn child.
And we have a situation in Australia where babies are born alive, but they don't receive an individualised clinical judgment mandated by law because they're born alive as a result of a procedure that was meant to end their life.
That includes, if necessary, upon medical assessment, the possibility of life-sustaining treatment. If you guys are against discrimination in Australia, if you guys are against oppression in Australia, if you guys are for equality in Australia, this is the bill for you, and I urge you to get behind it.
Emma, don't you think we should call for help and a retrieval team to provide care? Doctor said simply and coldly, no, wrap the fetus up and put it on the corner of the bench. From that moment on, everything was a blur, a cold metal table in the sluice room with a bluish pink fetus in a dish, baby still breathing and still alive.
So here is a former nurse of 9 years, and any medical procedure that's undertaken, part of informed consent is explaining the risks and potential outcomes. And so it really baffles me that this is not a requirement by law, that women and their partners are informed of the potential of a baby being born alive.
I think irrespective of Australians' views on the issue of abortion, this bill doesn't affect reproductive rights for women, and so one could be pro-choice and support this bill. And I think we saw that in the South Australian Parliament when the amendment to protect babies born alive. There were many members of that Parliament who voted for the Termination of Pregnancy Act, but who voted for this amendment for palliative care and life-saving treatment to be given if appropriate to a baby.
As we know, the systems are all already set in place for babies to receive this care. It happens with every other baby in the country, just not the ones born alive after an abortion.
I support the bill. I think the bill's requirements are straightforward, that a child born alive is a human being and that doctors have the same duty of care as they do to any premature baby.
We even know of the situation of Tim in Germany. He was a Down syndrome boy whose parents wanted to abort him after the Down syndrome diagnosis. And we know in Australia 9 out of 10 babies lose their life because of Down syndrome in utero. But little Tim, he was born alive and cried, struggled to breathe, wriggled for 9 hours on a metal plate. And eventually a nurse who was involved in the abortion, who was just waiting for him to die, just picked him up, wrapped him up with a blanket, controlled his temperature, gave him a little bit of milk, and he went on to live and was adopted out. And I think that story to me really, and his adopted parents wrote a book about his life. And to me, that sums up what this bill is about. It's about equality, and it's about a principle of non-discrimination. And it's the fact that we should have laws that mandate equal treatment for all babies in Australia, irrespective of how they came to be. So thank you.
Now, if you've watched this far, thank you for having the stomach and the decency to see what's going on in our nation. Thank you. Please share this video. The reason why I say to share this video is not so that you can distress other people. It's because the only way to have change, real, measurable, impactful change, and giving this bill a chance to pass, people have to know about it. We have to raise awareness. So if you can, hit the share button. God bless you. God bless our nation.
Yeah, that's my